Okay, so we just went through in the last section different measurements that political scientists use. And now we're really going to get into the good stuff of political science. We're really going to look at political systems, states, governments, regimes, nations, and we're really going to dive into some specifics of our course countries. So our first vocab term is political systems. So these comprise of the laws, the ideas, and procedures that address who should have the authority to rule. So who are our rulers, who are our representatives, and what the government's influence on its people and economy should be. So what say does the government have in its economy? Can it nationalize corporations? Can it take taxes from corporations? Can have sales taxes, for example? What's the influence on the people? Can they tax the people with a federal income tax or a property tax? Can they provide free speech? Will they have judicial systems that will protect civil rights and civil liberties? Will they provide public infrastructure for the people, like roads and bridges? There's so many different influences that governments can have, and these vary per country as well, in various levels too. And these change over time, particularly like spending. Maybe the governments will choose to spend more on education as there's more children being born in a country. Nigeria is growing very much so in their population, so education should be a pretty big focus in the country. So in the United Kingdom, there is a king. King Charlie is the king of the United Kingdom. So their political system has what's called a monarchy. And then in Mexico, their political system has presidential elections. They have a president, and then the people can elect a president through a electoral system. Here I have the results if you're interested. And then China has a very communist political system. Now let's look at countries. Now in this class, in AP Human Geography, we call countries states, but they mean the same thing, okay? They have various characteristics like defined borders. They have to start and end somewhere. A permanent population, so people can't just move in there, live there for 5 years, and move out. They have to have sovereignty over their internal processes and foreign policy. They also have to have recognition as a state by other states. So if they have these three characteristics, they'll have recognition as a state for the most part. Now that sovereignty part's pretty important. So we're going to look at an example later, but essentially that means that they can't have a government telling them what to do. So Canada can't tell Mexico that they have to have a sales tax of 7%. They can't tell them that. And Mexico can't just go with it because Canada tells it to. Mexico, if they wanted to set a sales tax, they could do it themselves over maybe what the people want or just what they want to set. And then again, they can have control over their foreign policy and who they have relations with. That's up to them. They don't have to do anything that's told by their external countries, these external powers. So Russia is an example of a country, a state. So is Mexico and the United Kingdom and Nigeria and Iran and China and Belgium and the Netherlands and Mongolia and Sri Lanka and India and Australia. All right, let's look at China's territory, for example. That's Taiwan. Is Taiwan a country? Jerry Seinfeld says yes. George says it's wrong. Because in AP world and in the United Nations and a lot of other people around the world, Taiwan is not a country because it lacks certain characteristics that countries have. I literally looked up Chinese territory for a graph, and this website had Taiwan listed as part of China's territory. China itself is a country. You can't have a country that's a part of another country. That literally doesn't make any sense. So it lacks recognition pretty much because it lacks sovereignty. So sovereignty, as I discussed pretty much earlier, is that it has to have dominant political authority and control over their internal processes and foreign policy. And this is exercised by a government over its territory and its people. So if something has sovereignty over a territory, that territory doesn't have its own sovereignty. That's different. It may have some kind of powers that it can rule over the air, like local governments have local laws, but it does have full sovereignty that's without influence and control of a bigger body. So Taiwan's under influence and control essentially under China, which is a bigger body. So it's not its own country. So the United Nations doesn't recognize it as a sovereign country, a sovereign state. because of this. And China is also on the UN board, and it doesn't say it's a country, so can't really make it a country without China's approval on the United Nations. So what's the role of a state? What does a state do? Why do we have states? Well, they create and implement public policy, and they claim a monopoly of force over a defined territory. So in AP Human, you may have learned of territoriality. That's essentially what this is. So they defend their territory. They claim what happens in the territory. They also what's it called? I said defend, but they also regulate what happens in that territory as well. What political, economic, social, cultural processes happen, what environmental processes happen inside a territory. And they create policy to regulate this, and they enforce that policy so they don't have anarchy. So let's look at an example here in Nigeria. So Nigeria collects taxes like pretty much every other country in the world. And they collect them through income taxes, property taxes, capital gains taxes, stamp duties, road taxes. There's many more that I didn't list. These are just examples. And then the state of Nigeria uses these taxes for public programs like infrastructure and defense, which is their military, educational facilities, paying public services like the police officers in the police force, as well as the water supply, because water is a public service in pretty much every country in the world, like Nigeria. So that's a role of the many roles that Nigeria has. Now let's talk about regimes. Regimes. I love saying regimes. It's really fun to say. So regimes refer to the fundamental rules that control access to and the exercise of political power. So it's characterized as democratic or authoritarian, and they endure from government to government. So if you change a government, the regime typically stays. It endures. So it's the way that the state is organized, and it's a pattern of organization. And we're going to look at how this pattern works and is set up. So as I said earlier, they are either democratic or authoritarian, and this is based on who exercises political power, as well as how they exercise political power. And one thing that we'll focus on in this course a lot is elections. So a democratic regime has free, fair, competitive elections, while authoritarian regimes do not. So we can see here we have some cool little ballot collection. I think this is in the United Kingdom, and the other one is definitely China. And the people with political power is the Communist Party, while people in the United Kingdom elect who has political power. Well, for the most part, in China, that doesn't really happen at the federal level. Now, there's also governments, which are different from political systems, states, and regimes. A government is the set of institutions, the actual systems themselves, or individuals legally empowered to make binding decisions for a state. So this is the legislative institution of Iran, which is the Majles, M-A-J-L-E-S. So that's part of the government. And the government's authority is derived from the state's legitimate right to use power to enforce policies and decisions. So this is the Constitution of Mexico, and this gives the government authority and its right to use power to enforce policy and decisions. It outlines how policy can be passed and how it can be enforced. And the right and power to govern itself without outside interference is a crucial aspect of a state's sovereignty. It's probably one of the most important parts of state sovereignty. Without it, you don't have sovereignty. Now let's look at nations. So this isn't a political entity. It's a group of people that have various commonalities, such as race, language, what they speak primarily. Sometimes this is one language or two languages, as well as religion, ethnicity, political identity. Some are more conservative, some are more progressive. And then we have aspirations. So that essentially means, what do these nations expect you to do in life? Do they expect you to marry young, have many kids, have few kids, get jobs? Can women work? What do they want to see in their political systems in the future? And that kind of relates to their political identity as well. Some nations correspond with certain religions. We're looking at a lot of Muslim nations, particularly. So let's look at some examples here. So in Iran and China, there are a variety of different nations that reside there. So in Iran, we have Persians, Azeris, the Kurds, and Arabs. And then in China, we have the Han Chinese, Tibetans, Uyghurs, which I believe are Muslims, and Mongols. And Mongols also live in Mongolia, but they also live in China as well. because they're very, very close together. So, yeah, that's why. And of course, I had to throw in the exception is the Mongols from Crash Course because it's funny. All right, let's look at Russia, Russia and Nigeria. And I might butcher some of these, so bear with me. So we have Russians, obviously. We have the Tatars and the Chechens, and Russia. And the Tatars and the Chechens kind of live in their own little area separately, which creates a lot of, they're called devolutionary pressures for their own autonomy and separation from the Russian national identity. They don't really associate themselves with the Russian national identity at all. And same thing with Nigeria. Nigeria is so diverse in their nationalities, and they all have their very strong distinctions. So we had like the Hausa, the Yoruba, and the Igbo, and many, many more. You should really look up the different nations in Nigeria. In the United Kingdom, these are pretty familiar. We have the English, the Irish, the Scottish, and the Welsh, the four main semi-autonomous regions. And we have Mexico, which is the mestizos, which are native Mexicans that they're the offspring of native Mexicans and Europeans, but nowadays it's just offspring of other mestizos. We have our Afro-Mexicans, so offspring of African and Mexican heritage with the Mayans, and we have the Zapotecs, I believe. I don't know anything about the Zapotecs. The Mayans, they're the Mayans. They're from there. I do want to emphasize something about the United Kingdom. So you may hear from other people on the internet or in the news, but see people, well, the country of Scotland. Scotland's not a country. It's not. The United Kingdom is a country, but Scotland is not a country. Same thing with England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Ireland is a country, and we'll discuss that. Ireland itself is a country. Northern Ireland is not a country. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. Ireland is not. And that happened because of religious differences between Northern Ireland and Ireland. But there's still the Irish nation. There's not Northern Irish. So, as I was discussing, these regions reside in autonomous regions. That's what we call them. So we have England, we have Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. They have sovereign abilities over themselves to an extent, not full sovereignty, otherwise they would probably be considered countries, because they're overseen by the federal government in London. They have they're unified under similar characteristics, like Northern Irish is Catholic, normal Ireland is particularly Protestant. In Wales, they have the Welsh language, for example. Scottish is also a language in Scotland. And then English, you can say English accents in the English language unify the people of England as well. You could say that the charismatic character of the monarchy also unifies the English people. Charisma, Riz. Charlie has Riz, I guess. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I forgot. I missed one. The Scottish National Party. So political parties can also unify people as well. So in Scotland, the Scottish National Party unifies the nationality of Scotland. Very, very cool. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.